when rangers spotted a female grizzly emerging from the edge of a scorched forest, her fur stained green from chemicals used in wildfire rescue operations. They didn't think she'd make it through the night. Burned, bleeding, limping. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely walking, was a cub no bigger than a house cat, clinging to life beside his mother's scorched paws. No one expected what happened next, because this bear didn't stop fighting. Not for herself, but for him. And what she gave up to save him will stay with you long after this story ends. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us tell more true, powerful stories like this, about survival, family, and the wild bonds we can't explain. The wind changed direction in the middle of the afternoon. It had been dry for weeks, the kind of dry that made bark brittle and soil crumble beneath your boots. Rangers at Bitterroot National Forest had been watching the heat indexes rise, but no one was prepared for the lightning strike that hit at 2:14 p.m. By 4 p.m., the ridge was glowing orange. By 5 p.m., it was war. In the thick of the forest, deep within the unpatrolled zone beyond the park's northern edge, a female grizzly led her cub through the underbrush, fast, but not frantic. Her fur was matted, her breath labored. Smoke had already tainted the air, acrid and thick. She nudged her cub with her muzzle again and again, urging him forward. He stumbled, fell, got up. She didn't stop. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she knew what was behind them. She had smelled it before she saw it, the fire, and she had no choice but to move. The cub, only 5 months old, was already coughing. His tiny claws scraped at blackened pine needles. His fur, a lighter brown than hers, was beginning to darken from ash. At one point, he collapsed, not out of panic but from exhaustion, and the mother stopped. Not to abandon him, but to cover him with her own body as embers began to drift around them like snow. From the air, rescue crews saw it. A helicopter dumping retardant circled back as the fire breached the old trail. That's when the pilot spotted them, 2 moving figures near a stretch of scorched firs. The mother grizzly had begun dragging the cub, one paw then the next, until they reached a clearing. And that's where she collapsed. Rangers were sent in on foot an hour later. They didn't believe the report at first, 2 bears on the edge of Sector 9, still breathing. The pilot had said, "The big one's green." He wasn't lying. When the team arrived, they found her covered in wildfire retardant, her fur tinted green from the chemicals. Her paw pads were cracked and bleeding, her eyes barely open, but she was alive, barely. And her cub was curled beneath her, protected from the worst of it. One of the rangers, a young woman named Sarah, dropped to her knees and whispered, "She brought him out." The emergency team arrived at the wildlife center well past midnight. The air was cold, but the van reeked of smoke, blood, and singed fur. Inside the crate, the mother bear lay motionless, her head resting on the cub's tiny body. Every now and then, her body twitched, her chest heaving not from breath but from instinct, refusing to shut down. She was still alive, but barely. Sarah, the young ranger who had helped lift the cub into the crate, rode in the back the whole way. She couldn't take her eyes off them. The cub whimpered occasionally, a broken, high-pitched sound. The mother didn't respond with growls. She didn't move at all. But when they arrived and tried to open the gate, she lifted her head and growled. Vets and handlers froze. "We need to separate them," Dr. Molina said. "She's losing blood. If we don't get fluids in her now, she's not going to make it through the night. But if we sedate her too hard," Sarah added, "we could lose both." They stood in silence. Then one of the assistants suggested something no one else had tried in a case like this: let the cub stay. Molina blinked. You want to treat her with the cub in the room? She's not letting go, the assistant said, eyes fixed on the bear. She burned herself half to death to get him here. We separate them now, she might just give up. They didn't argue again. Inside a sterile room lit by low yellow lamps, the mother was lifted carefully onto a reinforced platform. The cub was gently placed beside her, covered with a warm towel, an oxygen tube near his nose. As the vet cleaned her wounds, rinsing soot and chemical residue from her skin, she didn't resist, but her eyes never left the cub. Not once. Through hours of surgery, stitches on her shoulder, a cracked tooth removed, for fluid slowly pumping into her vein, she watched. Her breathing slowed but never stopped. Every time he whimpered, her ears twitched. Every time someone reached too fast, she growled, low and deep. They worked in near silence, out of respect. Not for the bear, but for the bond. At sunrise, the team stepped away. Sarah remained behind. She sat on a stool beside the enclosure, watching the mother bear rest, half conscious now. The cub stirred, and in the stillness of morning light, he climbed shakily onto her burned paw and curled up. And the mother? She pulled him closer with what little strength she had left, as if to say, if I die, he doesn't die alone. Sarah wiped her eyes with her sleeve. This wasn't science anymore. It was something else. Something holy. The next day, the center received calls from all over the state. News had spread, first through the ranger station's internal network, then across social media. Someone had posted a blurred photo from the rescue team, a full-grown grizzly coated in green fire-retardant chemicals, collapsed beside her cub, eyes burning with both pain and purpose. They called her the Green Bear. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know more. Reporters started circling. Wildlife officials from out of state wanted updates. A sanctuary in Washington offered to take both bears immediately. A private foundation even proposed airlifting them to a research facility with better long-term care. To the people in suits and badges, this was a case file, rare, dramatic, important for fundraising. But to Sarah, it was personal. She had watched the bear drag her cub from the edge of the fire. She had seen her refuse anesthesia unless her son was beside her. She had sat through the night as the bear's paw bled through the towel beneath his head. They weren't cases. They were a family. But the orders came anyway. The transfer would happen by the end of the week, 2 separate containers. Standard protocol. When the handlers came with the crates, the cub had gained enough strength to wobble on his own. Still small, still weak, but alive. They coaxed him with soft sounds, offering milk-soaked gauze and a blanket that smelled like his enclosure. He followed them halfway across the room, then stopped and looked back. The mother was lying in her enclosure, breathing shallowly, eyes barely open, but her head turned. She saw him, and the cub saw her. In that frozen moment, something happened that stopped every staff member in the room. The cub turned back, walked to her, climbed over her forearm, and lay across her chest, refused to move. One of the handlers whispered, stunned, "He's not leaving without her." Sarah stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "He shouldn't have to." That night, after hours of debate, the decision was made. The transfer would still happen, but not on separate terms. They would go together. Same crate. Same timeline. Same future. Sarah stayed late, sitting on the floor by their pen. The cub slept soundly now. The mother, still not fully recovered, blinked slowly as Sarah whispered to her through the bars, "He chose you over everything. Now we're going to choose him." The transport van rumbled down the old highway as dawn painted the hills in soft pink light. Inside a reinforced animal crate lined with clean straw and soft blankets, the mother bear lay motionless. Her eyes were shut, her breathing shallow. The cub, tucked beside her, fidgeted restlessly, as if sensing something was wrong. Sarah rode in the passenger seat, half asleep, until the sudden voice from the back jolted her fully awake. "Something's off," said Brian, the vet, monitoring vitals from a handheld device. Sarah climbed over the seat. She didn't need the monitor. She could see it. The bear's chest had stopped moving. "Pull over," she shouted. The van screeched to the shoulder of the empty road. Doors flung open. The crate was unlocked within seconds. Brian climbed in with a stethoscope. "Her pulse is dropping." "No," Sarah whispered. "She made it through a wildfire for him. She's not dying in a van." She pushed past and knelt beside the mother, placing both hands gently on her massive shoulder, trying not to cry. The cub stood up, tiny, clumsy, and looked down at his mother. He sniffed, whimpered. Then he did something that made time stop. He climbed onto her face, gently, carefully. He placed both of his small paws on the ridge of her forehead and leaned forward, and made a sound no one had heard before. Not a growl. Not a whimper. Something deeper. Sharper. A call. Long, desperate. Pure. It wasn't fear. It was a plea. "Don't go." And then her eye twitched. A blink. A breath. Her chest rose and fell. Again. And again. Sarah covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. She heard him, she whispered. She heard him. Brian adjusted the fluids, added oxygen through the side valve. Within minutes, her pulse stabilized. The cub curled back down beside her, his tiny body pressed tight against her neck, and the van rolled forward once more. No one spoke for the next hour. Because what they'd seen wasn't medicine. It wasn't instinct. It was something else. A bond no one could explain, but no one would forget. When they arrived at the sanctuary, a team was waiting. But now the orders had changed. They weren't to be separated, not even temporarily. The enclosure was ready, wide, safe, remote, and built for two. As the crate door opened and the mother bear stepped out, weak but walking, her cub stayed directly beneath her. Like a shadow. Like a lifeline. And every ranger present that day swore, the green bear nodded. Not to them. To him. The sanctuary sat on 400 acres of protected land in Montana. No tourists. No exhibits. Just quiet, monitored space for animals too wild to be pets and too wounded to return home. The green bear, as she was still called on every clipboard and report, had been placed in a large, natural enclosure, shaded by evergreens and hidden behind 2 layers of fencing. She shared it with only one other being, her cub. He was thriving, eating, exploring, climbing logs like he owned the place. Staff who watched the cameras said he seemed happy. But his mother, she remained still. Silent. Guarded. No vet could get within 10 feet. No tranquilizers were approved anymore. Not after the fire. And she made it clear, come close and she'd defend. Not from fear, but because she hadn't dragged her cub through hell to let anyone touch him now. Then came Ranger Eli. Not new. Not young. A man with a limp in one leg and more bare scars than stories he cared to tell. He didn't try to approach her. Didn't bring food. Didn't talk. He just came every day, just outside the fence, sat on a log, and waited. The cub noticed first. Came to the edge of the inner enclosure. Sat down. Eli would nod. Stay still. After a few days, the cub began mimicking him, tilting his head, pawing the same dirt, laying down at the same hour. The mother watched all of it. Then, one afternoon, it rained. Hard. Most staff cleared the area. But Eli stayed, soaked, sitting in silence. The cub approached the fence like always. But this time, he did something different. He carried a stick in his mouth, dropped it near the fence, then backed away, like an offering. Eli didn't touch it. He just smiled. That evening, camera footage caught something no one expected. The mother bear rose from the corner of the enclosure, walked, not limped, to the cub and licked his head once. Then looked straight into the camera and didn't turn away. The next day, for the first time, she approached the fence. Eli didn't move. But he whispered just once, "You did good, girl." She stared for a long time. And then sat down. Sarah watched from the main cabin. She turned to Dr. Molina and said, "He reached her through him." And the doctor nodded. Because healing doesn't always come from syringes and stitches. Sometimes it comes from stillness. From patience. From the quiet recognition that grief shared through a cub's eyes is still grief, and deserves to be heard. By late summer, the cub had doubled in size. He climbed trees now. He mock-charged the caretakers for fun. He made noises that weren't growls but almost sounded like laughter. He was wild and free, but still tethered, because his mother hadn't let go, not of him, not of the trauma, even after healing, even after trust. She still slept with her back to the trees, still woke at the sound of ash falling from branches, even when there was no ash. And yet, something in her had softened, the way she watched Eli, the way she let the cub wander, the way she looked at the open gate during evening checks. Then came the drone footage. A recon team flying over the old fire line noticed two bears moving along a blackened ridge. They were wild. They were cautious. But they looked okay. And that changed everything. Sanctuary leadership gathered that same day. Dr. Molina spoke carefully. If the mother's behavior continues to stabilize, he said, we may need to consider reintegration. Release? Sarah asked. Back there? She was born in that range, Eli said quietly. Her scent line still exists. Her cub may not know it, but she does. They all turned to Sarah. She'll go, she said. No hesitation. But not without him. The plan was delicate. The release zone would be remote, 12 miles from the original fire site, away from roads, rich in berries, monitored by satellite. No public announcement, no media, just a quiet return to wildness, if they accepted it. The day of the release, the sky was clear. The truck was quiet. No cages. The bears had been guided into a transport crate that morning with no sedation, no force, just trust. As the gate opened, the cub stepped out first, sniffed the air, paused. Then the mother emerged. She blinked in the sunlight, sniffed the earth, and didn't look back. They walked into the trees, one beside the other, step by step, until their shapes vanished into gold-filtered light. No drama. No ceremony. Only freedom. Back at the sanctuary, Eli stood with Sarah by the empty enclosure. She'll survive, she asked. He nodded. She already did. Winter came early that year. The trees along the old fire ridge bore both snow and new buds, a strange mix of death and rebirth. Trail crews had returned to the area for the first time since the wildfire. The forest still bore the scars, but something about the silence felt healed. Then, on a Tuesday in late November, Sarah got an alert on her phone. It was a motion ping from a trail cam position near a ravine 2 miles from the original release zone. Nothing unusual, except this time it was him. The cub. Alone. Larger now. Still young, but unmistakable. His fur thicker. His face sharper. He stood near the camera, curious, sniffing the lens before turning toward the trees. The image froze Sarah in place. She stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly, not because he looked different, but because he looked free. Still, one question hung in the air: where was the mother? 3 more weeks passed. Then on December 12th, another camera triggered in a neighboring canyon. The photo was grainy, obscured by snow, but clear enough to see 2 shapes. One standing just beyond the trees, the cub again, pausing to sniff a log. And behind him, almost hidden in the undergrowth, the mother. Not approaching. Not protecting. Just watching. She hadn't left. She was there all along, letting him wander, letting him grow, but never too far. Still his shadow. Still his guardian. But finally, no longer his cage. When Sarah printed the photo and brought it to Eli, he studied it a long time, then smiled softly and said, "That's how you know she did it right. He doesn't need her beside him anymore. But he still knows she's near." Back at the sanctuary, the enclosure stood empty. But every now and then, someone would walk by and see a strange pattern in the snow just outside the outer fence, large tracks, familiar. Like a mother circling the place where she once gave her cub back his life. Just passing through. As if to say, "I remember. And I'm still thankful." Sarah kept the photo on her desk. Not framed, just taped to the wall. Because some stories don't need headlines. They just need to be felt. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't always roar and love can be wild, burning, and silent, please subscribe to the channel. Like this video. Share it with someone who believes that family isn't always human. Because she wasn't just a bear. She was a mother in flames who walked through hell so her cub could walk in peace. And that's a kind of love the world should never forget.